Even though I'm having something of a mediocre tomato harvest this season, I have had a chance to try a number of new to me tomato varieties to see how well they fare through the hot and dry Sacramento summer. So today, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of these new varieties, summarizing growth habit, plant vigor, and of course flavor. But before I get into the new varieties, I'm going to give just a quick review of some of the tomatoes I covered in my first heat-tolerant tomato review video that have since become more or less a permanent fixture in my garden. The Cherokee Purple has become a reliable workhorse heirloom slicing tomato for me, as the variety seems to thrive through our hot and dry summers. As a bonus for small space gardeners like myself, its growth habit is fairly compact for an indeterminate, with vines not growing much taller than 6 feet or so. While the Cherokee Purple does well in my hot and dry climate, I have heard anecdotally that it struggles with high humidity. The Rio Grande has become my favorite Roma-type paste tomato, as it's not only adapted to our hot summer days, but our chilly nights as well. The Sacramento Valley can have extreme temperature differentials between day and night, especially in the early season when a day in the mid-80s can easily be followed by a night in the 40s. The highly prolific plants are compact determinates, usually maxing out at about 3 feet or less in height. While these aren't completely blossom and rot proof, I do find them far less prone to the condition than most other paste tomato varieties. The black cherry is one of our favorite cherry tomato varieties as it thrives in our climate, yields prolifically, and has a pleasant balanced sweet and savory flavor. Finally, the sun gold cherry tomato has become a common fixture in our summer gardens as our 6-year-old daughter loves them. They're honestly a little sweeter than my wife and I prefer, but the plants do thrive in our climate. If anyone wants a little more detailed of a look at the tomatoes I just mentioned, I recommend checking out my first hot climate tomato review, which I'll link at the end of this video. Alright, on to the newbies. Up first is our one and only new cherry tomato variety for the season, the Isis Candy. Touted as a particularly heat-loving tomato, the Isis Candy will grow vines 6 to 8 feet in length, though you wouldn't know it looking at my plants as I've let it collapse into a bit of a tangle at this point. So far, the single Isis Candy plant I've grown has produced an abundance of yellow to orange fruits, with just a hint of red mottling on the blossom end. In terms of flavor, if you bite into one hoping for a sun gold, you're probably going to be a bit disappointed, as it's not a sugar bomb sort of tomato. The Isis Candy is mildly, subtly sweet and very low acid, so it lacks that classic tomato tanginess. They're a very pleasant, refreshing tomato, perfect for applications where you want tomato flavor to be present but not necessarily overwhelming. Up next is the Super Sioux, a plum to slicing sized tomato that has a reputation for being able to thrive in hot, dry climates like we have here in Sacramento. I had high hopes for this variety, but it was not to be. The plant had a good, vigorous start to the season, but began showing symptoms of a disease I highly suspect is Fusarium wilt, just as they began to fruit. As a result, both plant growth and fruit production have been stunted. The plants are advertised as being indeterminate with a typical vine length of 5 feet, but most of my plants hit a wall at about 3 feet. I think that might be due to the disease, stunting them a bit. Still, I have been harvesting fruits that were able to set early in the season, and I'm currently up to about 36 pounds across 12 plants, again, in spite of the Fusarium wilt that is definitely working against them. I'm sure healthier plants would be far more prolific than mine have been. Most fruits have been in the 3 to 4 ounce range, with a handful of runts in the 2-ounce range and a few behemoths of 6 to 8 ounces. When you think of a garden fresh tomato, something like the Super Sioux probably comes immediately to mind. It's sweet, it's acidic, it's round, it's red. I've seen others describe this as being a very tomatoey tomato, and that summary is pretty apt. It goes great on sandwiches and burgers, etc., and makes for an excellent sauce. And I guess the one and only aspect I don't care for about this tomato is its thick skin. Seriously, the skin on this thing is like rhino hide, which isn't something I particularly enjoy from a texture standpoint. Still, I'm overall happy with this variety, at least in terms of flavor. Moving on to my most successful new variety this season, the Canistrino Di Lucca. This is an Italian heirloom sauce tomato variety whose name loosely translates to Little Basket of Lucca on account of their unique shape and apparently being originally developed in the town of Lucca. I randomly came across this variety when doing a little online seed shopping last fall. Thought they looked cool, so I took a chance on them. They were a little bit of a gamble as they aren't touted specifically as a heat tolerant variety, but they've really thrived in the hot and dry so far. The indeterminate plants will easily reach 8 feet in height and produce some of the biggest paste tomatoes I've ever seen. Fruits will range from 2 ounces on the low end up to 6 ounces on the high end, with most of them falling in the 3 to 4 ounce range. This Canestrino here was actually the biggest sauce or paste tomato variety I've ever grown at a little over 8 ounces, but a rodent decided to chew into the top of it before it had a chance to start ripening. That was absolutely infuriating, but it's all part of gardening. In my opinion, there's not much point in commenting on the flavor of a raw paste tomato. They're pretty much all bland with a pasty texture. You really need to cook these to concentrate the flavor. The Canestrino is maybe a little sweeter than, say, Aroma Type, but not by so much you'd want to sit and snack on them raw. I will say that these have a higher moisture content than Aroma Types, making them easier to run through my tomato mill at the cost of longer reduction times. This heirloom slicing tomato is said to have been developed by indigenous peoples in Mexico and is touted as having excellent heat tolerance. And so far, it's proven to be a decent producer here. The vines look like they're going to top out in the 6 to 8 foot range while producing a good amount of these beautiful, ruffled, pinkish red fruits. And it's the prettiest tomato I've ever grown that also tastes like a wet paper bag. At first taste, I was a bit disappointed with this variety, finding it bland and flavorless on par with a Walmart tomato, to be honest. However, a little more research revealed that most sources recommend this variety for grilling and stuffing as opposed to, on sandwiches and salads, etc. It's very possible that, like paste and sauce tomatoes, these need to be cooked in order to really bring out their flavor. I'm more than happy to run these through my tomato mill for sauce, and the idea of trying them stuffed and grilled definitely works for me. I actually grew this heirloom slicing variety last year, and they thrived in spite of the exceptionally hot summer we had then. This is an indeterminate variety, but like the Cherokee Purple, the vines are fairly compact, with mine seeming to want to top out in the 5 to 6 foot range in terms of height. When pruned down to 1 or 2 productive stems, fruits tend to be absolutely huge, with 1 pound or heavier tomatoes being fairly commonplace. It's definitely one of the most visually striking tomatoes I've ever grown, and the flavor doesn't disappoint either. In some ways, the Virginia Sweets is like a scaled up version of the Isis candied cherry tomato, in that it lacks an acidic tanginess and is mildly sweet, though notably sweeter than the Isis candy. The flavor, combined with its firm flesh and low seed content, makes the experience of eating a Virginia Sweets akin to eating a ripe peach or nectarine. I highly, highly recommend adding this to anyone's annual tomato lineup. It's fairly likely that this will actually be my last heat-tolerant tomato review for a while, as I'm going to be radically changing my approach to growing tomatoes next season. Rather than focusing on allegedly heat-tolerant varieties, I'm going to devote most of my tomato space to fast-yielding early-season tomatoes that produce in 70 days or less. My reasoning is, rather than trying to fight the heat of midsummer, why not take advantage of the very short window of ideal, moderate temperatures we get in Sacramento from about early April to early June with some prolific and fast-yielding varieties? So if anyone has some good early season tomato varieties to recommend, I'd absolutely love to hear about them in the comments. So until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.